Thomas here with Much Props, going to give you another how-to video. Today, the 5th of November, I thought it be very appropriate for us to make a Guy Fawkes mask, you know, like the one from V for Vendetta, the one that's based off of the actual person in British history who...
Hello, can I store this here?
Wanted to blow some stuff up to change some stuff in the political atmosphere. Not condoning that in any way. Just saying. So I thought that it would be pretty awesome to try and make the mask from V for Vendetta, or at least put my spin on it, and make it out of EVA with a free template that I can give you down in the description. So let's get to building. Periodically, I like to go through and show my whole process on template making so that you can get a feel for it on how I tackle this project. So for all you newbies out there who haven't watched any of my videos, here you go. I also have a full video dedicated to template making and another on how to size your templates properly that you could also go and check out. Generally, I start with a reference image. In this case, I'm using a 3D model program called Sketchfab as my reference image. With a dummy head, some duct tape, and foil, I begin trying to match the shapes. I simply just mold the foil into shape and then tape it to the dummy. To compact the foil a little bit, I just pat it down with a pair of scissors. Once I am happy with the shape, I cover the head in a big piece of foil and push it down into all the details. Then I tape it as tight as I can to the mannequin head. I try not to overlap too much, but I'm more focused on limiting the amount of wrinkles that I get, so you may see me cut pieces so I can fold it over properly. Smaller strips work better around curved areas. Generally, I only worry about one side of the face, like in this case, because the mask is symmetrical. I only need one side to make an inverted version of the other by simply flipping the template over. Now it's time to draw the cut lines. I've made over 100 helmet templates at this point, and I kind of intuitively know where to put certain marks, but here's my basic mindset. Anywhere where there's a sharp edge or a curve, I put a mark. You want to trace around eye sockets, and anywhere with a curve, you'll probably need to have a dart added to lay the pattern down flat on your material. These look like big V's when you cut them out. Registration mark the mess out of everything, especially the more complex it is. I usually make registration marks every inch to 2 inches or where a part meets another part. Once marked, cut off the dummy head and label each individual part somehow. Some people use numbers or letters. I often use just the parts of the body or whatever it is I'm cutting it from. So like, because this is a face, I'm using facial references to tell you where these parts lay. It also helps to take a picture before you make your cuts. That way you know where parts line back up to. Now time to transfer this flimsy foil and duct tape pattern onto some poster board to make it sturdy, flat, and easily traceable. I also do this step so that it's easier for you to see on my printouts for my templates. I cut along my part lines, cut out the registration lines with a notch cutter, and transfer any info that I need onto the paper version, like the label names and which side of the face it goes on. Some parts are joined to bridge the gap on both sides. I usually do this with like the bottom of the nose and the bottom of the chin to help pull the halves together and more than just that midline seam. This is normally where my build video starts. That's a good 5 minutes or so of sped up video that's been edited here, so now you can see why I rush through it on most builds. You may also notice at this point that my template has colors on it, along with sizes for the foam that I use. Before I trace anything onto my materials, I stare at these things for probably an hour or so, logically trying to think out where parts need to be cut and what edges need to be done to in order for things to line up properly. It's a lot of guesswork, but at this point I kind of have a feel for it. My color coding is generally the same for most builds, but also it's always explained in the cover page as far as how markings are on the parts. Green highlight in general is an outward 45 angle cut from the trace line. Blue is an inward 45 degree angle cut from the trace line, and orange or red generally signify an overlay. When you cut, you always cut inside of your trace line from the pattern. I use usually 6mm foam for most of my mask and helmet builds. It's sturdy, yet at the same time allows me to curve stuff. Use a sharp blade and try to make your pulls across the lines with as little stop as possible. Assembly time. I like to glue up half a side at a time to prevent glue from sitting for too long, so I lay out my template, doing my best to orient my pieces in a similar manner, and then glue up all the edges that I need with contact cement. Wait a few minutes, then after it is set up, I start sticking pieces together. Make sure to rely on those registration marks to help you line up your pieces, and try to keep the outside edge of the mask flush as possible with each other as you tack stuff together. This limits the amount of sanding you have to do later. With both halves assembled, I move on to joining the two parts down the middle. This can be a bit difficult, and you may have to reposition yourself a lot in order to get the right angle on stuff. Lightly tack things where they need to go, and when you're comfortable with the positioning, push together firmly. Seams that don't want to cooperate, I use CA glue on to help me kind of talk them into compliance. I know that the actual mask doesn't have an underlip piece under the chin, but when you're using EVA, like, you kind of need that so that it doesn't just spread out, or you don't have to put a wire in there, so that's why I have it under my chin. 2 pieces in, I realized I forgot to heat form, so I guess I'll do that step next. So right now my mask is looking a bit warped and weird. The great thing about EVA is I can heat it up and manipulate the shapes just enough to fix some mistakes or alignment issues like a lumpy forehead or a crooked nose. I can also go in around the cheek areas, run my finger on the inside, and actually stretch the foam out to enlarge that area. Just try not to heat it up too much on seam lines because it will pull the parts apart. This gets me closer. The next step will solidify the shapes and get me the rest of the way. To refine it further, smooth over all my seam lines and transition parts better, I put a stone bit on my rotary tool and round over some of the areas. The areas where the cheeks meet the mouth get a heavy rounded over and kind of down by the chin where it needs a bit more transition. Since this is a white-ish mask, I made sure to use silver Sharpie and not black because black Sharpie will leach through Plasti Dip and make my detail painting later a pain. A lot of pieces are guesswork, so I generally draw a shape, hold it up to where it's supposed to go and see if it fits. If it does, then I cut it in foam. I ended up having to cut these nostril pieces twice because I didn't like the way it lied on this first attempt you hear me doing. I ended up not making them sit at an angle like you see in this clip because it didn't look right, so I just made it lie flat against the side of the nose in the end. The eyebrows, mustache, bottom lip, and chin strip were all cut out, carved similarly to the nostrils into shape, and then details put on them before gluing. It's easier to do this before because you don't have to watch out for other parts when you're trying to sand areas away. I marked the position, put down contact cement on both pieces, and we can start to see this mask take its final shape. Two coats of Plasti Dip to seal the foam. I know some of you are screaming at the screen right now, why doesn't he just use white Plasti Dip? One, I always have issues with white Plasti Dip. It kind of bubbles, and then there's always a coverage issue or a drip issue or something. Something usually goes wrong that I don't generally have with black. And I kind of wanted to work backwards in terms of my color scheme. I feel like it gives me a bit dingier look with a quicker, less amount of washes by doing it this way. So I dry brush on a layer and then switch over to a sponge and dab on some more Plat Effects acrylic paint with the sponge to add a texture and kind of discoloration and unevenness on purpose. I dab on some red to his cheeks and lip and then decide it's time to, in much props fashion, dirty the mess out of this thing. I use a sponge and a chip brush wet down to make washes and add random dirty splotches all over the place. In the outro, you'll notice that I even went back and added some little drip stains and burn marks because I just like making my props look like they're lived in. My guy's seen some action. Some basic strapping as always. I'm using 1-inch elastic banding sandwiched between the mask and a strip of thin EVA to secure it all into place. I figure out the length I need by putting the mask on my face to see where it lays. Then I stretch the elastic past that point just a little to make my cut. To mask off my eyes, I simply just super glued on some black cross stitch mats. And we are finished. Here is the end result. Overall, I think it turned out pretty good. The eyes are a little bit off. I think the brow needs to kind of drop down just a little bit, maybe like 1/4 of an inch or so. But other than that, I think it worked out pretty well. I have been battling a sinus infection this week, so I only really had one feasible day to work on it and try and get a paint job done in that time. So for 1 day's worth of a build, it's a pretty cool shaped mask. Maybe you will try and make one of these yourselves and impress your friends with your ability to recap something from history, putting your own spin on it, and dirtying the crap out of it, because that's just what you do here on your own channel. Okay. Maybe you'll get some... Yay! And inevitably, they're going to ask you, how'd you make that? You can give them one of these. Tell them, much props. I guess it's time to start a revolution. Peace out. If you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and want to see more builds like this one, please consider joining these awesome people listed here with me over on Patreon to build a bigger, better, more creative community together.